Hey guys, tonight we're pulling the candle a little closer, leaning back, and starting with something that sounds like it belongs in a gothic novel rather than a military archive. Love letters written in blood and smoke. And no, that's not me being dramatic. It's genuinely how the lives of some of history's most infamous fighters unfolded. Because here's the thing, warriors, rebels, generals, pick your poison, were rarely just cold steel-wielding tacticians. Behind the muskets, sabers, and gunpowder-stained uniforms were human beings who fell in love, who wrote embarrassing letters that probably should have been burned, and who often dragged their lovers into the violent whirlpool of their own ambitions. And the messier it got, the better for us, because their tragedies read like bedtime thrillers. So picture it, battlefields still reeking of sulfur, tents lit dimly by flickering lanterns, and in some corner, a man or woman hunched over parchment, scribbling words that could either melt a heart or endanger lives. These weren't your standard, dear beloved, I miss you, sincerely, yours truly letters. These were words born out of obsession, desperation, and sometimes a desire that rivaled the bloodlust of war itself. And tonight, we begin with one particular pair who turned their private passion into something that nearly reshaped the politics of their time. So picture the 16th century. Europe is a jigsaw puzzle of shifting alliances, wars that seemed to start every other Tuesday, and mercenaries who'd sell their loyalty to the highest bidder. In the middle of this chaotic backdrop, we find Johann Cercles, better known as Count of Tilly, a Bavarian general, one of the most feared commanders of the 30 Years' War, the kind of guy whose mustache alone could have recruited an army. Now, Tilly wasn't exactly the heartthrob of the battlefield. He was old, wiry, pious to the point of being humorless, and carried himself like someone who had forgotten what sleep was. But under that rigid armor of Catholic discipline, he had a secret weakness. A woman whose letters made him soften in ways that contradicted every sermon he listened to at dawn. Here's where it gets interesting. Unlike most generals who kept mistresses tucked safely away from camp life, Tilly wasn't discreet. He let his affection spill into letters that he wrote with powder-stained hands, sometimes literally after walking back from the cannon lines. And when you're writing love letters on the same paper used for war orders, well, let's just say things blur in ways they probably shouldn't. These weren't flowery Shakespearean sonnets either. They were raw. He wrote of longing while describing troop movements. He slipped in endearments between casualty numbers. Imagine, my beloved, today we lost. Sambikman at the Danube crossing. But all I could think of was the warmth of your breath in winter. Sweet? Yes. Creepy in context? Also yes. Because fate loves irony. One of these letters didn't just end up in the wrong hands. It nearly shifted an entire campaign, so here's where our story leaves the awe, that sweet territory, and marches straight into oh no, that's going to ruin someone's career. One damp autumn morning in Ichinlu by Arshelu, as Tilly's army was slugging its way across the German countryside, a courier carrying one of his infamous letters never made it to its intended destination. The poor man was captured by Protestant scouts near the Weser River, and because soldiers in the 16th century had nothing better to do, they opened everything, including that letter. Now imagine being a hardened Swedish officer expecting to find military secrets, and instead reading, your scent lingers in my thoughts, even amidst the smoke of cannon fire. I would trade the spoils of Magdeburg for one glance of you from the balcony of your father's estate. Oof. Not exactly the kind of thing that inspires battlefield fear. And worse, it mentioned troop positions, hints about supply routes, and, because love makes people foolish, his planned movements over the next 2 weeks. Basically, Tilly's enemies now had a war plan wrapped in perfume and sentimentality. The Protestant commanders didn't waste time. They leaked the contents to their allies and, more cruelly, to the Catholic League's political council, who were less than thrilled that their most seasoned general was writing poetry when he was supposed to be winning battles. It was scandalous. One ambassador even quipped, "It seems Tilly's sword is not the only thing drawn to the enemy." And yet, here's the twist. The fallout wasn't as disastrous as you'd expect. Why? Because the letter had an unintended consequence. It made Tilly human. Fortafo. Chisel words. Soldiers whispered about their cold, iron-willed commander having a lover. Morale, strangely, rose. Men who had feared him began to follow him with a new kind of loyalty. Because now, he was just like them. Flesh, blood, and yearning, but that didn't mean the woman behind the letters was safe. In fact, her name, once unknown, became a whispered secret across Europe. And soon, she would find herself in more danger than Tilly ever had on the field. Alright, though we've teased enough, it's time to talk about the woman who managed to melt the iron shell of Johann Tilly, the monk in armor. And no, she wasn't some random tavern girl or camp follower, though heaven knows plenty of generals entertained those distractions. This was different. Her name, at least in most of the preserved letters, was Anna Maria von Hohenberg, a minor noblewoman tucked away in a castle that probably smelled of whetstone, beeswax candles, and too many tapestries. On paper, she wasn't supposed to matter. Her family held just enough land to be respectable, but not enough to truly be dangerous. The kind of noble line that slipped into the background of history. Like wallpaper. But here's the thing about minor nobles. They were perfect matches for ambitious generals. High enough to be respectable, low enough not to cause political earthquakes. Or so Tilly thought. Yarst Anna Maria was clever, sharp, and apparently just the right mix of devout misdone and daring. She'd grown up reading the lives of saints, but also the poetry of Petrarch. So she knew both how to pray and how to play with metaphor. And when she started writing back to Tilly, her letters were nothing like the polite, stiff correspondence you'd expect from a noblewoman. They were fiery, teasing, and sometimes downright reckless. One fragment that survived reads, "When you write of smoke, I imagine it clinging to your skin. When you speak of cannon, I hear them as drums announcing your arrival. Do not think me innocent. I know what it is to long for touch." Now, remember, this is the Lobai Artersis. A woman writing that could easily ruin her reputation, but she didn't care. Or maybe she cared too much and couldn't stop. And Tilly? The grizzled, disciplined general who terrified Protestant armies? He melted, of course. Here's the tragic part. Once those letters leaked, so did her identity. Suddenly, Anna Maria wasn't just a noblewoman in her tower anymore. She was a potential liability, a scandal, a pawn. And in 16th century Europe, pawns often didn't survive the game. Next, we'll follow what happens when Anna Maria is dragged, into the world of war, not by sword or cannon, but by the dangerous power of words, when priests read your mail. So, here's the problem with being a general in the Lobai Artersis and falling for a woman who actually knows how to write. Your letters aren't just sweet nothings. They're also potential political dynamite. And in Johann Tilly's case, that dynamite went off the moment the wrong eyes saw them. Now who had the wrong eyes? Enter the Jesuits. Those guys had a knack for sniffing out impropriety like bloodhounds. And in a war where religion was literally the excuse for every slaughter, you better believe they weren't going to ignore gossip about their star general scribbling racy metaphors to a noble woman. Apparently, one of Anna Maria's cousins, jealous, opportunistic, or just deeply nosy, got hold of a letter and passed it to a local priest. And the priest, being exactly the sort of man who thought his role in life was tattling to higher authorities, just sent it up the chain. Suddenly, the letters weren't just about smoke, drums, and longing touches. They were evidence. Evidence that the pious, monkish Tilly wasn't quite so monkish after all. And here's the kicker. Rather than being ashamed, Tilly doubled down. Of course he did. Because why not make things worse? He kept writing. But the fallout landed squarely on Anna Maria. Whisper campaigns started. Women in court are brutal when they smell scandal, and her name became a weapon. Ah, yes. The general's saintly temptress, they'd say with that smug little smile that's really a knife in disguise. By the time 1627rolled around, Anna Maria had become something far more dangerous than a mistress. She'd become a symbol. A Catholic noblewoman accused of seducing a holy warrior. A stain on the narrative the church wanted to spin. And in that world, symbols didn't just get punished. They got erased. And yet, here's the wild part, Tilly protected her. Quietly, yes, and often from a distance, but when orders came down that she should be questioned, relocated, or worse, those orders mysteriously stalled, vanished, or ended up at the bottom of someone's desk. It was as if his sword wasn't just defending Catholic lands anymore. It was defending her name. But the closer he tried to shield her, the more dangerous it became for them both. Alright, so here's where things get messy. Literally mud, blood, fire, the whole awful picture. But before we dive in, let's pause for a second. Imagine being Anna Maria. You're not just reading letters anymore. You're living them. It was 1627, and the war had reached one of its ugliest chapters, Magdeburg. Now, if you've ever wanted a perfect example of the 30 Years' War at its most nightmarish, Magdeburg is it. The siege was long, brutal, and when the walls finally fell, well, let's just say humanity didn't exactly put on its best performance. Fire ripped through the city, people were slaughtered in the streets, and the name Magdeburg became shorthand for total devastation. Okay, so why was Anna Maria anywhere near it? Because Tilly had done the unthinkable. He brought her with him. Not openly, of course. He wasn't parading her around on horseback. But quietly, tucked into the fringes of camp life, she was there. Living among the officers' tents, dressed in clothes far too fine for the mud but too beloved to discard. Silk, quite literally in the mud. Think about the sheer recklessness of that. Tilly was supposed to be the stern ascetic general, feared by his men and revered by priests. But behind those canvas walls, he was writing letters that no longer had to be mailed. They were whispered directly into Anna Maria's ear. Of course, the men noticed. Soldiers always notice. They saw the flicker of lamplight in the wrong tent. They whispered about the woman who moved like she didn't belong, who carried herself with the grace of a court, not the grime of war. Some even claimed she walked among the wounded, her skirts brushing against bloodied straw, offering water in a hand too delicate to hold a bucket. And here's the tragic irony, for Tilly, bringing her close was a way to keep her safe. But in doing so, he had put a target on both their backs. Because when Magdeburg burned, rumors spread even faster than fire. Soldiers muttered that the general had been distracted, that the massacre, the chaos, had happened because his mind was elsewhere. On her. Now, was that fair? Absolutely not. The disaster at Magdeburg was the result of months of military pressure, bad luck, and the sheer brutality of the war itself. But gossip doesn't care about fairness. It cares about scandal. And Anna Maria, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, became the embodiment of whispered blame. That was the moment their love stopped being a secret affair and started being a liability. Lalil.